The lobby of the luxury hotel was pristine, with gleaming marble floors and towering chandeliers casting a soft glow across the room. It was the kind of place where every detail was meticulously designed to make the guests feel like royalty. As the afternoon sun filtered through the large glass windows, the guests moved through the space with elegance, their voices soft as they spoke in hushed tones. But in the midst of the high-end ambiance, there was a sudden disturbance. A young girl, no older than 10, stood at the reception desk, her small hands clutching the edge as she nervously fidgeted with her fingers. She was waiting for her father, who had gone to park the car, but the receptionist, who had seen her standing there for a few minutes, grew impatient. "Excuse me," the receptionist said, her tone sharp and condescending. "You can't just stand here. This is a hotel lobby, not a playground. If you're not checking in, you should wait outside." The young girl flinched at the harshness in the woman's voice. Her eyes welled up with tears as she tried to hold back her emotions, but the receptionist was already turning away, dismissing her with a wave of her hand. "Honestly," the receptionist muttered under her breath, "some people just don't know how to behave in public." The young girl stood frozen, holding back her tears, unsure of what to do. She glanced around, but the other guests were too absorbed in their own conversations to notice. The receptionist, however, had no idea what was about to happen next. Moments later, the door to the hotel lobby swung open, and a tall figure entered, his presence immediately commanding attention. Clint Eastwood, the young girl's father, he walked toward the reception desk, his steady footsteps echoing in the otherwise quiet lobby. His eyes immediately found his daughter, standing still, her small shoulders hunched in discomfort. Clint's gaze then shifted to the receptionist, whose expression faltered slightly as she realized who had just entered the room. The receptionist smiled, but there was a nervousness in her eyes now, a sharp contrast to the confident demeanor she had displayed moments ago. Clint approached the desk, his voice calm but filled with quiet authority. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his gaze flicking from his daughter to the receptionist. The young girl, feeling the tension, looked up at her father, her eyes filled with both relief and a hint of embarrassment. "No, Dad," she whispered, trying to hold it together. The receptionist's smile grew more forced, and she quickly glanced at Clint. "No problem at all, sir," she said, her voice slightly shaking. "Just a misunderstanding." Clint raised an eyebrow, his eyes narrowing slightly as he observed the situation. "Misunderstanding?" he repeated, his voice low. "It seems more like a lack of respect." The receptionist froze, realizing the mistake she had made. She had no idea who the girl's father was, but now she understood. Clint Eastwood was standing in front of her, and the situation had taken a very different turn. The receptionist's face turned pale as the realization hit her. She had no idea that the quiet man she had just insulted was Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor known for his commanding presence both on-screen and off. She had assumed that he was just another wealthy guest, but now she stood before him, fully aware of her mistake. Clint's gaze never wavered. He wasn't angry, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes that made it clear he wasn't going to let this go. "Do you always treat guests like this?" Clint asked, his voice steady but filled with a quiet power that made the receptionist feel small. The young girl, still standing beside her father, looked up at Clint, her eyes full of gratitude. She had been hurt by the receptionist's words, but now, with her father standing up for her, she felt a sense of protection she hadn't known in a long time. The receptionist stammered, clearly caught off guard. I didn't mean," she began, but Clint raised a hand, silencing her. "It's not about what you meant," Clint said calmly. "It's about the way you treat people. Respect is earned through kindness, not by belittling others." The receptionist, now realizing the gravity of the situation, nodded quickly, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm very sorry, sir," she said, her voice apologetic but shaky. "It was a mistake, and I apologize to both of you." Clint didn't immediately respond. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before turning to his daughter. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, her lips curving into a small but grateful smile. "Yes, Dad. I'm fine." Clint turned back to the receptionist. "Make sure it doesn't happen again," he said, his voice firm. "Every guest here deserves respect no matter who they are." With that, Clint placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder and walked away from the counter, leaving the receptionist standing, in stunned silence, her heart racing from the encounter. As Clint and his daughter walked toward the elevator, the hum of the hotel's luxury setting seemed to return, but there was a noticeable shift in the air. The receptionist stood frozen behind the desk, her hands now visibly trembling as she processed what had just transpired. Her actions had not only insulted a guest, but had also deeply affected the child, and in front of Clint Eastwood no less. She stood there for a long moment, the weight of the situation sinking in as whispers started to circulate around the lobby. Some of the guests had overheard Clint's words, and the shift in their behavior was immediate. The power of the moment lingered, leaving everyone who had witnessed it a little more aware of how they treated others. Meanwhile, Clint and his daughter stepped into the elevator, the doors closing softly behind them. Clint didn't speak at first, his expression calm and composed, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes as he turned to his daughter. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked gently, his voice softening. She nodded, but her voice wavered slightly. "I didn't think she'd say something like that to me, especially in front of everyone." Clint placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "People can sometimes be careless with their words," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean they define who you are. What matters is how you carry yourself, how you treat others, and how you respond to things like this." His daughter looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, and for a brief moment Clint saw the strength in her that he had always hoped she would find. As the elevator doors opened on their floor, Clint led his daughter out into the hallway. He glanced back at the lobby where the receptionist still stood, now speaking with the manager. "Don't worry about her," Clint said softly. "She'll learn." They walked down the hallway, and Clint's daughter, feeling a renewed sense of confidence, squeezed his hand, knowing that her father had just shown her one of the greatest lessons in life. Sometimes standing up for others means standing up for yourself too. The days that followed the incident in the lobby were surprisingly quiet for Clint and his daughter. They spent their time enjoying the sights and sounds of the city, but the encounter with the receptionist lingered in Clint's mind. It wasn't because he wanted attention, nor because he wanted to make a spectacle of the situation. It was because he believed deeply in standing up for what was right. People often underestimated the power of kindness, thinking it was something soft or passive. But Clint knew better. Kindness, when paired with respect and authority, could be one of the most powerful forces in the world. A few days later, Clint received a call from the hotel manager, who had heard about the exchange. Clint wasn't sure what to expect, but when he picked up the phone, he was greeted by a sincere voice. "Mr. Eastwood," the manager began, "I wanted to personally apologize for what happened the other day. Our staff member's behavior was unacceptable, and we've addressed the issue with her." Clint listened in silence, his hands resting on the edge of the table. "I appreciate you reaching out," he said simply, his tone calm but firm. It wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about making sure respect is at the core of how we treat others. The manager quickly agreed, and Clint could tell that the hotel was taking steps to ensure something like this wouldn't happen again. But the conversation wasn't over yet. "I also want to thank you," the manager said after a moment of pause. "Your actions set an example for the rest of us, and I hope that the staff can learn from this. You've reminded us all of the importance of kindness and integrity." Clint's response was simple as always. "Kindness doesn't require a grand gesture," he said quietly. "It's in the little things, the way we speak to each other, the way we respect one another." When the call ended, Clint felt a sense of satisfaction, not because he had been right, but because something had been learned. The receptionist, though embarrassed, had taken something valuable from the exchange, the understanding that words mattered, that respect was something earned and given, not demanded. The next day, Clint and his daughter were preparing to leave the hotel. As they checked out, the receptionist was at the desk, but this time she greeted them with a more respectful and humble demeanor. She wasn't overly apologetic, but her eyes carried a softness that hadn't been there before. "Clint," noticed the subtle change and gave her a small nod as he walked past the desk. His daughter, who had been a little nervous about seeing her again, now felt a sense of calm. She didn't need any more words or grand gestures. She just needed to know that the situation had been acknowledged, that it wouldn't be forgotten. Clint's words, though simple, had made an impact, not just on the receptionist, but on everyone who had witnessed the exchange. As they walked out into the bright morning sunlight, Clint placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "How do you feel now?" he asked. She smiled up at him, a look of quiet strength in her eyes. "I feel better," she said. "Like I can handle things, on my own now, without letting anyone make me feel small." Clint smiled back, his heart swelling with pride. "That's exactly what I wanted you to learn. No one should ever make you feel less than you are. You're stronger than you think." They stepped into the car, ready to continue their journey. But for Clint, the journey wasn't just about the places he visited. It was about the lessons he imparted along the way, the quiet moments that left a lasting mark on others. As the car drove off into the distance, Clint looked out the window, content in knowing that his words, his actions had made a difference. And that was all that mattered. Please subscribe channel for Clint Eastwood. Respect. Thanks.